table to my center has been placed there to honor our prisoners of war, missing in action and killed in action. Military history and traditions are filled with symbolism. The items on the table represent various aspects of the courageous men and women still missing. The table was smaller than the others, symbolizing the frailty of one prisoner alone against their oppressors. The table was round to show our concern for them is never ending. The tablecloth is white, symbolizing the purity of their response to our country's call to arms. Remember. The empty chair depicts an unknown face, representing no specific soldier, sailor, marine, or airman, but all who are not here with us. Remember. The Bible represents faith in a higher power and the pledge to our country, founded as one nation under God. Remember. The black napkin stands for the emptiness these warriors have left in the hearts of their family and friends. Remember. The single yellow rose reminds us of their families and loved ones who keep faithfully awaiting their return, lest we forget. The red ribbon represents the love of our country, which inspired them to answer the nation's call. Remember. The yellow candle and its yellow ribbon symbolize the everlasting hope for a joyous reunion with those yet unaccounted for. Remember. The slice of lemon on the bread plate reminds us of their bitter fate. Remember. The salt upon the bread plate is symbolic of the tears of their families as they wait. Remember. The wine glass turned upside down reminds us that our distinguished comrades cannot be with us to drink a toast or join in the festivities of this evening. Remember. The POW MIA flag symbolizes the willingness to never forget the POWs and MIAs of all wars. Let us never forget. The folded American flag represents those that have paid the ultimate price to defend this nation and their fellow man. Let us honor and never forget them. Remember. Ladies and gentlemen, I propose a toast to the brave men and women, past and present, of the Army, Navy, Marines, and our Air Force, our soldiers, sailors, and airmen.
represents the same patriotic and moral principles on which our country was originally founded. The portion of the flag denoting honor is the canton of blue containing stars representing the states our veterans served in uniform. The canton field of blue dresses from left to right and is inverted when draped as a pall on a casket of a veteran who has served our country in uniform. In the armed forces of the United States, at the ceremony of retreat, the flag is lowered, folded in a triangle fold, and kept underwatch throughout the night as a tribute to our nation's honored dead. The next morning, it is brought out, and at the ceremony of reveille, run aloft as a symbol of the enduring nature of the American spirit. Represents our weaker nature. By recognizing the challenges that we face, we develop the wisdom needed in times of peace as well as in times of war. The fifth fold is a tribute to our country, or in the words of Stephen Decatur, our country, in dealing with other countries, may she be always right, but it is still our country, right or wrong. The sixth fold is for where our hearts lie. For it is with our heart that we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The seventh fold is a tribute to our armed forces, for it is through the armed services that we protect our country and our flag against all of our enemies, whether they are found within or without the boundaries of our republic. The eighth fold is a tribute to those who have given their lives so that we can live in freedom. The ninth fold, it is a tribute to womanhood, for it has been through their faith, love, loyalty, and devotion that the character of each man and woman who have made this country great has been molded. The tenfold is a tribute to Father, for he too has given his sons and his daughters for the defense of our country since the birth of our nation. The 11th fold, it is for equality. In the words of our Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The 12th fold recognizes the spirit of selflessness. As John F. Kennedy inspired the nation with the words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And last, we are not Americans. And on this, we vow that as long as this flag flies, we salute you. The stars are uppermost, reminding us of our national motto, in God we trust. And the sailors and Marines who have served under Captain John Paul Jones, who were then followed by their comrades and shipmates over and over and over again into the armed forces of the United States, preserving for us the rights, the privileges, and the freedoms we enjoy today. Sir, we ask that you accept this flag in recognition of your service and sacrifice for our freedoms and our country.
Ladies and gentlemen, we move from ceremony to celebration. We next have for a salute to the armed services. Now, we know most everybody in here has something to do with the Air Force, but if you've ever served in one of the other branches, we invite you to stand and be recognized for that service as well. ago, I've worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I thank my lucky stars to be living here again, 'cause this flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. I won't forget the millions of other days that life to me. I'll extend our thanks to you, and the curse still remains. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, and across the plains of Texas, and from sea to shining sea, Detroit down to Houston, from New York to LA. Yes, there's pride in every American heart. Now it's time we stand and say that I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. I won't forget the millions of other days that life gave me. I gladly stand up next to you, and the hurt still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Wasn't absolutely just wonderful and just heartwarming. There are no words for what we just witnessed. It's just absolutely beautiful. So, and our guest of honor this evening, we have so many. I would like to introduce our head table at this time. On the far right is Bert McKinney. Bert is her husband, Bill McKinney, passed away a few years ago. He was a member of our committee, our planning committee. We have almost 6 committees over the past several years. We love Bill, we love Bert, and we miss him, and may God always be with you. And he's here in spirit. I know he's up and looking down at us, and y'all have a good time. What would he say? Thank you, Bert, for being here tonight. We love you. Thank you for being here. Next to Bert is Carol Steitler. Carol, she's the husband of Dave Steitler. Oh, geez, wife, oh yeah. You know, I'm gonna get casual now. I'm not a formal guy. I gotta take my tie off and put my cap on later because I feel much more comfortable. I'm not a professional MC. I'm just a good old-fashioned down-there Southern Polish guy. So, okay. I sincerely apologize. Oh my God. But this is my right-hand man here. Now, actually, we're both right hands to each other. Dave has been involved every weekend. This is the 4th one, actually. First one was just all avionics, but Dave has stepped in. He's just been an absolute godsend. I love you, Dave. And Ken is there back home. He can't make it. I know he's thinking about us. He wanted to come. But Dave's done this one outstanding, just a wonderful, beautiful job. I'll thank you again later. To my left is my beautiful wife, Sharon. She's had a tough week, putting up with me, first of all, probably. But no, she's had some challenges this week. Let's pray that she gets better. And to my left is Jean Gray. She is the wife of our honored guest, David Gray. I'd like to introduce the commander of the 48th Flying Training Squadron. All these guys you see here tonight are from the 48th Flying Training Squadron. And they flew in yesterday. And I'll let the Lieutenant Colonel, I want to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Charles Gillum. So, Colonel, would you please come to the Thank you.
No, thank you guys so much for having us here. It's so great to be part of this reunion. And what I'm going to do is just kind of tell you a little bit about the 48th Squadron. and kind of bring it full circle from 100 years ago to the 48th Flying Training Squadron today. So as you guys know, in 1917, not only marked the entry of America into World War I, but it also marked the 100th anniversary of the 48th Squadron. On April 2nd, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went before the joint session of Congress to request a declaration of war against Germany. Wilson cited Germany's violation of the pledge to suspend unrestricted submarine warfare in the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, as well as attempts to entice Mexico into an alliance against the United States. On April 4th, 1917, the United States Senate voted in support of a measure to declare war against Germany. The 48th Aero Squadron was activated, mobilized, and deployed to France with the American Expeditionary Forces to defeat the Central Powers 100 years ago in the war to end all wars. In September 1917, the 48th Provisional Squadron attended basic training at Kelly Field in Texas before joining the 1st Aero Construction Group in Garden City, New York. Throughout the war, the squadron constructed barracks and shops in central France. And after the armistice, the 48th Provisional Squadron was reassigned to the 3rd Army Air Service and moved to Trier Aerodrome in Germany as part of the Army of Occupation. After reactivation in 1927, the 48th School Squadron conducted flight training at the 10th School Group, training personnel from 1927 to 1931, also in 1933 to 1936. After becoming the 48th Pursuit Squadron in 1941, the unit was once again renamed, becoming the 48th Fighter Squadron, which conducted air defense patrols along the California coast before joining the fight in World War II. During the war, the 48th Fighter Squadron dominated many missions, including bomber escort, fighter sweeps, and advancing ground troop support and reconnaissance flights. The current squadron insignia dates back to World War II, to the late Walt Disney, who passed away in 1966. The Walt Disney Production Company created approximately 1,200 designs during World War II for both American and Allied forces. The studio did all of this work for free of charge, as a donation to the war effort. The 48th Fighter Intercept Squadron, who's had its roots from 1952 to 1991, tried for years to have the 48th Alley Cat logo integrated into their patch, but ultimately it was unable to do so. However, in 1986, the battle was finally won, and the 48th was granted permission by Disney to use the design for patch purposes. The Possumtown Alley Cats is the same one as you see on the shoulders of men and women flying in the 48th Flying Training Squadron today. Here's a copy of our patch that was designed by Walt Disney. I think it's up there on the screen as well. The 48th legacy lives in each and every one of us. We're no longer constructing airfields. We're no longer patrolling the skies for enemy aircraft. But we honor the excellence of the 48 men and women, both past and present, with our sacrifice. Two such officers who embody that sacrifice is Jack Ilfrey and Virgil Smith, members of the pilot training class of 4101. Ilfrey was originally credited with being the first P-38 Lightning ace in World War II, until a change into the accounting rules after the war gave the title to Virgil Smith. We also remember Michael Breas, a Hispanic-American fighter pilot who paved the way for future generations with 12 confirmed kills. The legacy of the 48 lives in Smith and Breas. It lives in the men and women of the 48 Flying Training Squadron. We are absolutely honored to be with you this evening. Thank you so much for allowing us to be part of the F-106 reunion. And I am just blessed as the commander to have a front row seat to their excellence, to what they do every day, training pilots, producing pilots to keep our country safe every day. Again, thank you so much for having us here. Please share your stories. We love them, and we'll share our stories as well. Thank you very much. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you for the words. An honor to have you. Who are the members of the 48 tribe flying training zone? Please stand. Just recognizing all you guys. Thank you guys for being here tonight. Good to see all you young guys out there doing what we did 30, 40, 50 years ago. Someday you're going to look like us. Guys and gals. I'm sorry, guys and gals. Boy. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to introduce one of my favorite guys in all these reunions, and you all recognize him. He's been so much involved with the F-106. He's our resident caricature artist. You've seen all of his works over many years on the backs of plates. But you know, he's Mr. I'll call him. There's a lot of Mr. F-106s, but he's probably flown in on every F-106 base ever known. There are 26 F-106 associated bases. That's really something, considering they only built 308 F-106s. They're spread out over 26 Air Force bases over the years since 1956, 57. So I'd like to turn the mic, thank goodness, over to Lieutenant Colonel retired Nick Stokes. Come on up. Come on down. What's that say? 3757 flat. On the back it says, boom, boom! Okay, rules of engagement. Arlie, things get going too long out here. You got your roles. You can tell us when things go too long. So if anybody's got a good arm, you can throw it back out sometime. Oh, good. I'm honored to be able to be up here and speak to you all as to introduce this fellow. Because it was in 1967 that I briefed a mission along with a guy I respected named Robin Olds, and it was going to be Bolo 2, January 23rd, 1967. I was a backseater, I was a give. I was a pilot. I was learning to have an ego, how to have an ego in the middle of this war where, hey, we're going downtown all the time. So we briefed that mission, flew it, and I was told to stand down because I wanted somebody else to fly. They didn't want Robin to fly it. They had to have Vermont Garrison, the double ace from World War II and Korea, lead it. But it didn't turn out to be that good. It was a cloudy day, it was a sand day. And we lost an airplane. And I went on and finished my career, and I spent the next 25 years flying airplanes, thinking about how lucky I was to fly airplanes and to come back. For all the guys who didn't come back, and especially those guys who got knocked down. And one of those guys who got knocked down, I knew Barry Bridger. I hadn't met the other guy, didn't know who he was, but I came to this reunion about 4 or 5 years ago, and there's a guy out there selling coins and patches and these things. And I tried to talk to him a little bit, but he was kind of quiet, reserved. He didn't really want to say anything. But he turned around and he had his flight jacket on the back of his flight jacket. He had 1.5 missions, North Vietnam. Now, we all have our 100 mission patch, but he's got 1.5 missions, North Vietnam. So I said, where'd you get that? And he said, I was shot down on January 23rd, 1967. And that was this guy, David Gray. And I got to tell you, let me tell you something about this fellow. He was born a little bit before I was, in 1941, in Findlay, Ohio. His father was a pilot in the Army Air Corps. His mother and his dad and all moved around quite a bit after the war. So they were in Selma, Alabama, Hickam, Albany, Georgia, Arlington, Virginia, Abilene, Dover, Plattsburgh, and sometimes they'd stay in Daytona Beach. But he did all the things most of us would do back then. Is played a little bit of football in junior high school. Graduated 1 year before I did, in 1959. Tried for the Air Force Academy, but hey, he decided to go on and he ended up going to the University of Florida. Graduated in '64. And he'd gotten married in '63. And he'd gotten into construction management. Did a pretty good grade point, over 3.0, graduated from the ROTC. He attended pilot school in Webb, just right downstream from me. I was going at Reese. And about 80% of all our assignments at the time were as backseat pilots and F4s. So he ended up getting checked out, came into UBON to fly with the 497th, and they were all the night owls. They're flying all the night missions. They all painted the bottom. They tried to paint the bottoms of all their airplanes black. But those were kind of scary missions. We lost a lot of airplanes flying at night. He'd gotten a couple other missions in Laos, but then he got shot down on that day at Bolo 2. You don't hear about Bolo 2, but you should, because that was David Gray's day. He spent 6.5 years there. He doesn't talk much about it. He'll tell you his story today, but they didn't treat him too bad. They didn't treat any of those guys very bad. How they treated and whatnot is something that we all that were up there try to remember, because we wore these bracelets with all those people that were missing, and we finally got those guys back. So he came back in 1973 from 210, 15 pounds. He was down 150. And he's gained a little bit of it back. And since then, his hair's turned a little bit of gray. But now he's married to Jeannie. They've been married 37 years. 33. They're going on 33, going on 37. He had a pretty good deal when he came back, though, because they offered him about anything. He ended up, well, so he flew T-39s for a while. Decided rather than go on off and fly airplanes, that he'd get smart again. Got selected and went to AFIC, studied computer science, and got his master's there in business administration. And he entered that field and really got involved in his first job at the Air War College at Eglin. And it became his specialty. He spent a lot of time trying to convince the generals and colonels that these computer things weren't all that bad, that someday they'd be ruling the world, and they didn't really want to probably talk about it, he said. But he tried to convince them. But he continued to do better things. He was the director of data automation there at TAW, Fighter Weapons Center. He moved up to electronic warfare engineering and test director. That was his proudest assignment. But he followed on, going up to TAC headquarters in Langley, and I was up there in Langley too. I didn't see him up there, but we saw a lot of other guys like Creech. But he successfully got onto the battle staff, and that was a big deal because now they had their battle staff there at Langley. And he became one of the directors in the Air Warfare Center then at Eglin. And he ran the Green Flag Exercise Directorate. He retired in 1993 as a lieutenant colonel, served 32 more years. And his decorations include, well-earned, if not more, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star with a B for Valor, Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Medal, and 2 Oak Leaf Clusters. POW Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, 14 Battle Stars for Vietnam. Really proud that this guy came back. A lot of things those guys enjoyed. There are a lot of days we thought about him over there, and that's why today a lot of us are very thankful every single day to get out in the sunshine. You know, when there's sunshine out there, I think about David Gray and say, hey, for you, buddy, really Glad I can introduce you here tonight. I didn't say that. It was him. A few seconds to get organized here. Be nice, Dick. I have ammo. I want to say a few peripheral things before I start my remarks. I think we all should give this wonderful band another round of applause. They're very good. I was the second trumpet in 7th and 8th grade junior high band, and when you were playing the national anthem earlier, I was humming the second trumpet part. It's not anything anyone would recognize, but I got big and never moved up to first trumpet. So when you become a football player, you get stuck with remembering how the second trumpet part sounded. These two fellows here have done a marvelous job with this reunion, and let's give them another hand. Let's all keep Sharon in our prayers. I've seen her struggle in the last several days, and she needs to be remembered in our prayers this evening. I had this set up, this store down there, and was listening to people tell stories and watch some of these slide presentations. Some of them were pretty impressed. But one guy said, talking about the YF-12, he said, that was the F-106 follow-on. Well, I kept my mouth shut. And if you might remember, there was a design proposal for the XF-108, two J-75s, Mach 3 plus. There was one design proposal where the pilot was going to lay down because he was going to be above everything you'd be shooting at, so get looked down. They didn't build it. The Canadians had an airplane, the CF-105. I think it had two J-75s also, and they couldn't afford to build it. But I'm pleased to issue that correction. The F-108, which of course was named the Delta Dirt. Those of you who didn't go to Grand Ole Opry, ask somebody who did where that came from. And if you did, wasn't that a great show we got to see? I'm pretty impressed. Tanya Tucker, 55 years old, bounced around on stage like a 20-year-old. So that was very entertaining. Did Dick say something?
It was.
Oh, and the little moment where there was a discussion, a momentary discussion about Germany in 1916 and 17 trying to entice Mexico to come into the war. I went to pilot training at Webb Air Force Base, and
on the other side of the runway, they had to be segregated from the second lieutenants, was an F-104A squadron, a fighter interceptor squadron, I don't remember what number. And evidently they were placed there to protect us from Mexico. So that's all it would take would be, I think they had 11 airplanes. Tilted church. Well, he corrected himself right away, but it was interesting. All right, let me get a little serious now. I want to give you a little background, a little history, and I will diverge from my prepared remarks with little stories. It has been a long time, and if you do the math, I was shot down in '67. That's been 50 years. That's scary. When you talk, when you stand up in front of people, and some of you are older than me, I can't claim to be the oldest person on the planet, although I probably am older than Bobsky. Something that happened 50 years ago usually doesn't have a lot of relevance, but in 1967, I was a young Air Force, jugging-jawed, steely-eyed, backseat fighter pilot. Was flying an F-4 that was shot down over North Vietnam by a surface-to-air missile, SAM. And if you've heard the stories about people who flew there in high-performance aircraft, if you had visual on a SAM and you had any energy left in your airplane, you could usually outmaneuver it. Unfortunately, that day we were let down to a layered overcast, and our flight leader, our squadron commander, I won't mention names, had leveled us off right, we were just skipping across a deck. So when it broke the surface, everyone's looking where the raw gear said, here it comes. We're all looking over that way. We didn't have any time to avoid it. The only worst thing than being shot down by a SAM, if you're a fighter pilot, was being shot down by a MiG. There was some of those. So we didn't have adequate time to avoid the SAM. Our right wing was blown off, and we had some electrical fire in the cockpit. And so there's not much you can do with most any airplane, particularly an F-4 if you got no right wing. So we ejected about 14,000 feet down through the layered overcast, didn't see each other, of course. I had been in a bad posture when I ejected. Like an idiot, I went for the lower handle. And when I thought I moved it and nothing happened, I bent over to look at it. That's when it went. So I broke a few bones in my back. Fortunately, nothing serious. I was mobile when I hit the ground. But I was captured immediately, and Lieutenant Bridger, we were both first lieutenants. That was unusual. Was captured immediately after I was. Was led to a nearby little village, interrogated briefly, and then put on display. Here's the first story, although I've already interjected a couple out of the sequence. The division of smart people in North Vietnam who were working for their government, the military was one entity. The political, in the Soviet Union, we would call them commissars. In North Vietnam, they were called cadre. They were, in most instances, at the local level. They were senior to the local military people. And so it was quite surprising when out in the boonies, here comes someone speaking English. It was one of these cadres. And so we had, after the little interrogation where language problems really prevented it from being much of an interrogation, we had a little show and tell. I was in it. They'd taken me into a building that had 3 steps to go down to the grade level. And while the little interrogation had been going on, they had gathered maybe 20 or 30 villagers. They were arrayed neatly in a little semicircle about that far away. And there was this little old lady right here. The cadre, they wore all royal blue. You could tell them a mile away. He was standing behind me, pushed me out on this little 3rd step, talking in Vietnamese to the crowd. They went through some cheers. We came to call them huda-hudas, for the lack of a better term. It was kind of like a cheerleading thing. And this old lady had a bandage on her hand. And the English-speaking cadre says, "You murdering," I won't say some other words he said. He knew a lot of good English words. Injured this old lady. I thought, like, I wanted to say, where do those sand boosters go? They're almost as big as an F-4. Obviously, they fall back to the earth. But I didn't say anything, but she was supposed to strike me. Well, about the highest she could strike me would be about my belly. So he pushed me down a step or two, and she ended up being able to reach me, and she went about like that. And looked very disgusted at being required to do that by this cadre. And I kind of picked up at the time, this was mysterious. We were fairly close to Hanoi, maybe 35 miles, and perhaps, in thinking about this later, it was that they had been so over propagandized by their own government that they were sort of tired of that. But she didn't really want to be there, you could tell that. The display business was repeated. Bridger and I were put in a little vehicle, and we were started on our way off to Hanoi. Put in a little vehicle, and every little town we came in, the guards would stand up and brandish their weapons. We found out later, and it was a revelation, that most of the guards, even in the prisons, had no ammunition. Their AK-47s had empty banana clips. If there was an air raid, you would hear one AK-47 firing from within the compound where we were and where the guards all were in a kind of a concerned setting. One weapon with ammunition. But anyway, we were paraded around a little bit, and that wasn't a big deal. When we got to Hanoi, they put blinds. We were already tied up, elbows tied behind you, boots strung together around our neck. And you take fat and happy Americans, you take them and take their shoes off. Now we're barefooted. We're immobile completely. You didn't have to tie our elbows together. They had us. But we went to the Wallow prison, infamous Wallow prison. That translates as red flower. I never did really figure out how Vietnamese named things. It didn't make a lot of sense to call the prison red flower, but that was the name. We called it the Hanoi Hilton, which we thought was a far more appropriate name. And the interrogation started, and it got pretty nasty after I didn't answer questions after name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. The rope torture, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, but an easy brief description would be manacles, which are kind of a figure-8 metal thing, a hinge on one end, a bolt or a screw, holding them together in the middle. You couldn't do this like our hand does. Behind you, I can't even do that now. with ropes tied from your wrists around your throat and to your ankles, and pulled ever tighter. And you don't bend it too well in those directions. This went on for maybe 20 minutes, and I gave in initially. This was repeated twice more later in that day. And I was fortunate in that I hadn't been in a squadron very long. I was on my 4th mission, my 2nd mission of North Vietnam. That nonsensical answers. On day 2, I had a session with interrogators that were in training, and they couldn't really do much of their job because they had such a limited vocabulary. But after a bit, I was left alone for several hours in this one room with some very rudimentary furniture. There was a wooden table, and scratched into the table was some names and places. And I know Topeka, Kansas. That was part of the intelligence I brought back with me when I was released. I said, Topeka, Kansas, does that mean anything? Is there an MIA from Topeka, Kansas? Well, there wasn't. But the thing that most interested me was in letters scratched into the wood, about half an inch high, was the phrase, God is alive. And in slightly smaller letters, off to that side of that was, and living in Argentina under an assumed name. Well, so right away, I knew I was around a lot of Americans, and that things were going to be good. So, after 3 or 4 days with no medical treatment, no food or water, I think I got the first water on the 3rd day, the first food on the 4th day. I received my prison clothes, gave them my flight suit, and I got a blanket. This was January, and it was fairly chilly. So after 55 days in solitary, I got my first cellmate. He was a Navy F-4 squadron commander who had been in solitary for 550 days. It was a long time. I was lucky. I lived in many prisons and shared cells with some of America's best and bravest heroes. Our prison life was terrible and at the same time monotonous. We had a lot of nothing going on, and then punctuated, and you've all heard this, by moments of sheer terror. That may be a little too dramatic, but that kind of described it. We slept on wooden planks as beds, and our beds had leg irons built in. We had 2 meals a day and usually 3 cigarettes. And there's a long story about Ho Chi Minh, the president of North Vietnam at the time, how appreciative he was of his British captors when he was a younger man trying to foment revolution in Hong Kong. The British had arrested him, and he was appreciative of their treatment of him, which included giving him cigarettes. So I smoked at the time. I have to say that one of the things that lessened the impact of being in solitary confinement for days and days, and certainly with Bill Frank, my first cellmate, was the art of communication, the tap code that we had developed. It was well developed when I was there. If I had understood what it meant, right next to the God is alive thing scratched into the table was a 5x5 matrix of our alphabet with off to the side C equals K. 5x5 is 25, and we all know there are 26 letters, so we had to leave one out, and that was K. So we could tap messages on the hard wall surfaces. And people ask, why didn't you use the Morse code? Morse code is not binary. Binary is 2, and Morse code has, well, let me back up. The tap code, I don't want to hurt this, this is the letter C. First row. I screwed that up. That was a B. 1, 2 is a B. 1, 3 is a C. 1, 4, you can make those noises. The binary part being noise and no noise. So if you try to use the Morse code, you have noise, scrape your knuckle, not good. The guards are looking for that. So we developed the tap code, and every cellmate I ever had, new ones, old ones, experienced, injured, not injured, it didn't matter. We all knew the tap code. Whenever there was a work detail and somebody would get one of these shaggy brooms to sweep the dirt, each sweep code 1, 2, 3. You could use a certain bodily function to send code if you had that much gas. I'm going to hear about that later. But I was very lucky. Being green 16 has its advantages. Green 16, for some of the ladies who may be new to this environment, means we were very junior. We weren't senior officers. I was a baby lieutenant. I lived in shared cells with some of America's best. And I'm repeating what I already said. Excuse me. After you were captured for a short period of time, just a couple of months, you became worthless as an intelligence asset to them. And so the intel interrogation people disappeared. You didn't see them anymore. The political people that wanted to indoctrinate you into how wonderful their cause was, how worthwhile it was. And I heard some interesting stories from interrogators about the North, our American Civil War, trying to do the same thing in the South that they were trying to do with South Vietnam. And it was interesting. When I had graduated up to having 2 cellmates, we were selected to go to a long unused property we called the plantation. And it was, some said it was the former house of the mayor of Hanoi. Remember now, stories. Stories can be interesting and untrue at the same time. And that we were all military guys, and so those two ideas meshed well. Or some people thought that it might have been a porno production facility because they found a bunch of 16 millimeter film in one of the buildings. We were cleaning it up. It had not been used for some time. So in this facility, there were 3 of us, Paul Galante, a Navy pilot, Charlie Green, flying an F-105. He had been a 106 guy at Lorry, and I think one of the very first second lieutenants to get checked out in 106. Also there in solitary confinement was Dick Stratton. He had, under torture, he had evidently told them he had gotten a graduate degree on the Navy, from the Navy, by going to Stanford, and it was in political science. So they panicked and thought he was the equivalent of a cadre. So they took him away from everybody. We couldn't get anywhere near him to communicate with him. We'd see him a quarter of a mile away. That was about it. But the other guy that was there in solitary confinement was Doug Hagdahl, the Navy E-2, who had been asleep on deck on a cruiser, a gun cruiser, out in the Tonkin Gulf when they started shooting. They had 8-inch guns and they were dueling the shore batteries. It was night and they had radar gun fixing, and of course the V did. So the first time the 8-inch guns fired, the cruiser jumped that way and he rolled down one deck. And then another turret fired and he was in the drink. He treaded water and inflated his blue jacket's jacket like they told him in basic training to stay afloat. And when the sun came up, the fishing boats were all out there and they captured him. And as soon as they captured him, they started interrogating him, accusing him of being a spy. Of course, naturally. This is how the United States puts spies into every country. We throw them in the water 10 miles off the coast. Eventually, he had them convinced that he was as dumb as some of their junior enlisted people. And we said, when we talked to him surreptitiously a couple of times, we said, how did you convince them of that? He said, they gave me an orange and I just bit into it. And they said, no, no, no. He said, they wanted me to read propaganda. And I told them I didn't know how to read. And they said, we'll teach you how to read. And so Paul says, well, how's that going? Another day, we did little chores around there, and we were getting a little bit better food. We were getting some raw sugar. We were getting out in the sun, and we dug a well that went to nowhere, about 15 feet down, with entrenching tool, shovel no bigger than that. And this was not a prison. It had been used, it had a bunch of big rooms for grain storage. The theory being that the former mayor of Hanoi was speculating in the grain market. It's a story. And so we did little outside jobs like that. One day we were walking from our cell to go to work, and once again, there was Doug at the window of this big antebellum plantation-looking house. That's why it's called. We named it. Paul and I disagree about who came up with the name. Air Force guys are much more clever than Navy guys, so it was obviously me who came up with that name. We said, what are you doing? He says, I'm making signs. I said, signs? He says, yeah, and he showed us one. Piece of vellum paper, about 3 feet long, 7 or 8 inches top to bottom. And it said, clean, ampersand, neat. Well, we were a little mystified about what that was all about. And he said, they want me to make another one that said, good order and discipline. I said, when you do that, misspell discipline. Spell it discipline. And so he did. A couple days later, we go out, we do some work, digging this well that went nowhere, come back to our cell for lunch, and above Paul had the center bed. I was over here, Charlie Green was over here. Above Paul's bed, on the wall, is good order and discipline. We said, whatever propaganda circus they want to start, this is going to be great. Well, before the before the circus started, they caught their error and they put up the other sign, so it wasn't quite as good as we'd hoped. But some East Germans, 3 East Germans, who were making a film that you can probably still see called Pilots in Pajamas. They were making this film. They had a shoulder-mounted 16mm movie camera, a battery-powered big light source. It was very dark in our cell, and a German camera that was a focal plane, had a focal plane shutter. None of us Americans had ever heard that sound. It wasn't this kind of an iris, it was whatever. So the upshot of this is that when these 3 went home back to East Germany, 2 of the 3 photography people defected in Hong Kong. One took motion picture film, ultimately sold it to NBC for the nightly news. And they would not let the DOD see that before it was broadcast. The other guy that had the stills sold his to Life magazine. Same thing. They would not let the DOD. And the problem with that was, Paul ends up on Paul Galanke, the Navy guy, and sitting on the end of the center bed, framed with the clean and neat sign behind him. He was on the front page, but I had gotten up and turned my back to the camera. Well, we had this kind of a haircut, those sheep shearing things, you know, and I have a little mole on the back of my head. It's not in any of my identification, you know, like today they get pictures of your tattoos, I guess. And so the problem with that was that I ended up being claimed by lots of mothers and wives because of the missing MIAs. The North Vietnamese never announced who they had captured, who was alive, who was dead. And it created a lot of hardship. So, I had to call 2 mothers. In '73, when I came back, that many years later, they were still convinced that the pictures were their son. And I could recognize it because of the door frame and so forth. So, stuff like that breaks your heart. Because of this bad attitude on my part, the 3 of them, I have to tell you too, we knew something was up because we had shaved, usually about once a week. They had the moral equivalent of Gillette brown blade. Do you remember that, guys? Young people don't have a clue what I'm talking about. But we had shaved 2 days earlier, and they had us shave again that morning. So that meant something was up. And so they took us down one at a time to shower and shave. I went second, came back into the cell. They took Charlie Green down, and the bathhouse was behind this storage area, and they forgot him. He was down there 5 hours waiting for something to happen. He missed lunch, hardly ever happened. And the whole rigmarole, the whole circus had happened when one of the guards wandered down there looking over at the fence was about waist high. They hadn't built it up yet. We'd be out doing these work jobs, and the Vietnamese people would gather and look at us. And when we were digging the well, they knew we were going to be digging the well when we walked this way. They would move from over here down to that one corner where the well was. And they'd get in fights. and the police would show up. We're not in trouble because we're under the guise of the Army. But the mustard-colored uniformed police in Hanoi would break up the fights. And the fights were about who could get closest and see us best. We were, evidently they didn't have any good movies to go to. So, we were sent to what they said was a punishment camp. Now, I have to say something. I've screwed up here a couple times. I've said room. I have not said yet camp. I will make the effort always to say prison, not camp. You can go camp into prisons. And we weren't in rooms, we were in cells. Rooms have doorknobs. Ours was a cell. So I just about screwed up, and I have written here, moved to a punishment camp. Yeah, I screwed up. I'm getting old. This was a setup for another propaganda service. There were 3 makeshift prisons where people who had participated unwillingly, for the most part, in this pilots in pajama movie that the Germans were putting together. And this was the offshoot. Several, 6 or 8 people in 3 different prisons surrounding the Hanoi thermal power plant. What's a thermal power plant? Well, you take coal and you burn it, it turns turbines, and you generate electricity. And this was evident when we named the first makeshift prison the Dirty Bird, because it was downwind, and the big smokestacks would have clinkers. We'd be out taking a bath, shower, and these little specks of coal that were red hot. What the hell is that? You could barely see it. So then, to get our drinking water, we would take an aluminum bucket, huge thing. There were 10 or 12 people that got water. And the guards get a water ration every day, just like we did. And we would take this and go to the Hanoi thermal power plant, go up the stairs, inside, give it to this little guy. He would take it over, take the lid off, do some piping adjustment, and dump live steam on sewer water, we called it. Nasty stuff. And that's how we boiled the water that we drank. And they cooked with. And so it got to be one of the most interesting periods that I had as a prisoner, because these were small prisons. 4 or 5 guards, maybe 1 junior officer. I have to tell you this little side story. We gave all the Vietnamese guards and officers names so that when we tapped through the wall, we could standardize so we all know who we're talking about. This guy did this to us today in an interrogation. Be careful and don't repeat my mistake, that sort of thing. We called this one guy Snake. Snake was a ladies' man. He was not a bad-looking guy for a Vietnamese. He was a younger man. And he left us in an interrogation room, 2 of the 3 of us, to contemplate our bad attitude. We'd done something wrong, and we had a bad attitude. So we were there thinking about our bad attitude while he went off and did something. And he left a little book. Reached over on his side of the table and looked at his book. And it was maybe 4 by 6 pages, leather bound, all worn. You couldn't see the title. You had to open it and look at the printed page to see the title. And it was English Idiomatic Expressions. Copyright 1923. And so, this explained why from Snake we heard things like, "Oh, you kid." Well, 1967, 68, we don't know how to respond to that. What does that mean? We didn't even know. I mean, that was so long ago. We'd seen a George Raft movie maybe when we were kids or something, and they said this. I think he said 23 skidoo to somebody. Thinking he was being so cool. So, and every day we would go, not our cell, one cell. I think they liked us because there were 3 in our cell, and they could screw over one guy, because we all like to get out of the cell. And so they could pick which 2 of the 3 of us in this cell was going to get out. So we'd get out, and we'd get a big bamboo choky pole about this big, and the water thing would be empty carrying it over there. It would fit under the top. The top was sort of screw-on thing, had a big handle. And, of course, the pot was hotter than hell when the water was boiled, so, well, it was heavy. We'd carry this thing. So we'd go over to the Hanoi Thermal Power Plant. The kids knew which time in the day we would be. Kids were never in school in North Vietnam. I don't know how they, whatever. They were always there, every day of the week. And particularly when, well, we all 3 did it. We taught Donald Duck talk to it. The kids would laugh, roll around on the floor, make the guards very angry. And the guards would, these are kids that are like 5 and 6 and 7 years old, little kids. And the guards would gesture at them with their weapons. Of course, we knew by then they didn't have any bullets. They had a carbine called the SKS that had a folding bayonet at the end of it. And usually when they escorted prisoners, they'd have that out. That could hurt you. So we'd pay a little attention. And there were always little things that we did so that it was a contest. We would win, they would. We always tried to be on the winning side. One little guard that had a Czech machine pistol, unlike any that we'd ever seen before or after. He was very proud that that was his weapon. He would march. I love this. He would walk facing us backwards toward the Hanoi Thermal Power Plant. One day, and the kids were following alongside of us, trying to get us to talk Donald Duck. But we discovered that if we moved over here like this, he would too. So we started kind of meandering, not walking so slow that he'd get irritated. He didn't seem to notice what we were doing. Well, big pothole full of water. It had rained. We walked him right into that. And the kids laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. And of course, we were innocent. So these are the only kind of things that you can do when you're in that situation. Let me do this. I've lost my place. Oh, we're in the Hanoi Thermal Power Plant one day when the air raid siren goes off. You can hear it. There are squawk boxes on every street corner. By then, my Vietnamese isn't as good as it was, but my vitesse ap Hanoi, American airplanes attacked Hanoi, Ba Mui Mutai Ba, Ba Mui killed 310 kilo, 30 kilometers away. Well, we can do the math. And once it got inside Mui kilo, that's 10 kilometers, 6 miles, you started hearing guns. So we went through that whole thing, sitting there saying, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. It's not time for a Navy raid. Navy was 2 o'clock. And they were going after this thing with walleyes, Navy weapon. We didn't have it. We hoped we didn't have it because it was Air Force raid time. And what had happened was, it was the first time that the flak suppression people used the little ball CBUs that had varying times. The Vietnamese had shown us in one of their little propaganda movies how efficient our weapons were and how clever they were. They would go out after a flak suppression and pick all these up, showed some guy juggling them. Well, if you put their contact fuse in the ground, go off. If it doesn't go off, if you kicked it on the ground, it would go off. It would start the timing fuse again. All afternoon we heard from our cell across this big road were elliptical antennas sticking up, SAM sites, or gun sites, stand-ons. And about a day later, we went out of there. They came and got us in the middle of the night, no preamble. Also, we came to find out that 2 guys had escaped, had gotten out of their cell in the middle of the night, had timed the guard going around there. It was on the other side, one of the makeshift prisons on the other side, that touched the retaining wall of the thermal power plant. And they just busted out, closed the shutters on the window they went through. Didn't look any different. Guards didn't notice they were gone until the morning. They went down. We were close to the river. We could see it. They got in the river, did a 2 or 3 mile bobbing down the river. George Coker, George McKnight, Air Force guy, Navy guy. I just remember their names. Got, once again, fishermen immediately when the sun comes up, fishermen. They got captured. They moved us back to the new section in Wallow, and then they took about 65 of us to Somme, out of the country. Now we had 9 people in a cell. It was a good deal. And this was the prison where they tried to rescue the Americans. As it turned out, they were several months too late. We were there for a couple of years, and evidently the fire bees, which was a photo drone, flew over the camp several different times. You could hear it coming. It wasn't a MiG because it had this small little turbine engine sound. And somebody had been able to put 2 and 2 together. I don't know what they saw, where they decided that this had to be a prison, a POW prison. But the most interesting thing in the 2 years that happened there was Ho Chi Minh died. And they tried, evidently unsuccessfully, to improve our treatment. We got a visit by a dentist, this older man who had a foot-powered drill, something he cranked with his foot, and gave people killings. He pulled one guy's tooth that had been killing him. It was in my cell. And Wes Sharm, who started his career flying F-89s in the Pacific Northwest. Wes got this tooth, put it on a string around his neck, and it was like he had a disintegrator ray or something. The Vietnamese would give him about a 5-foot berth. This tooth hanging around his neck was kind of nasty looking. The spot rotted out, and it terrified him. We all thought that was the funniest thing that ever happened. We had moved to a better facility. I happened, by happenstance, to be in the inn cell. The Sanjay raid was in the month of November. We moved in late July, and we had gone to bed normally one night, and a SAM site, literally right across the street from us, woke us up, and we watched out my inn window and saw afterburners, 105s, and this one of the SAM suppression airplanes got shot down, and they got down and killed Mrs. Helmet, which they showed us the next day. That's not the way you want to be awakened, but we were kind of happy that they made that effort. After this, we all moved back to Wallow, and they put us in the back half. The back half had been for Vietnamese people, and they've been going through attitude adjustment training back there. We had 48 people in a 60 by 22 foot room, and that gave us, we all slept on the little raised concrete platform in the center of the cell. We all had 22 inches of space, which isn't enough guys for sleeping on the ground. I have to say that we had a good time there. The Gook said, kind of backed away. I said that word. I'm sorry. I told my wife I wouldn't use that word. That's a racial epithet. And we are all more mature than that. How about feet? Can I say feet? Maybe. They had backed away from us an awful lot. And that made our lives, although extremely monotonous, it made it much more pleasurable, and we got organized to the extent where people, you get 48 Americans in a room with various educational backgrounds. We had people that would teach 4 foreign languages, not the same person, but Spanish, French, German, and Russian. We had math being taught, different things like that. Part of my contribution was telling movies, entertainment in the evening. And then in early 1972, our hero, President Nixon, started the bombing again. And all of a sudden, about half of us, we'd all been in Hanoi. Not that we had all been in the back half of Wallow. The senior types were in another section, difficult to communicate with. Everybody that was in 06, we had a bunch of 06s, and some of the senior 05s. And Stockdale was shot down. He was a commander. So about half of us got moved way north, almost to the Chinese border. That was March or April of '72. Later that year, the Paris Peace Accords, the talks had begun, and from time to time we would get information, but it wasn't as good. They didn't have electricity there, so we couldn't hear. I don't know if the young ones won't know what this is. Hanoi Hannah was one of their daily AM and PM propaganda broadcasts. It was the same in the AM and the PM. But she would play some American music. She would talk about how the war was going. And it was childlike, the propaganda. May have impressed somebody, but for us it was an information source. And we missed that, frankly. So we were being cut out of some information. Late that year, November, one night, we all got shuffled around and got put in capture date order. So obviously we knew something was up. And then shortly after that, guards showed us in their newspaper, Vietnamese newspaper, pictures of B-52 people, B-52 crews. So we said, B-52 crews. We were that half that was not in Hanoi. Later, when we got together, the half that was in Hanoi told some interesting stories about how at dusk the guards would all disappear, and you would hear concrete sliding noises. And what that was their air raid shelters were concrete pipe about this big around put in the ground. They had lids. They could get in there. They would all get in one of those for fear that the B-52s were going to bomb the Hanoi Hilton. So we, one day in January, they wake us up and they put us in trucks, and we drive back to Hanoi. And it was kind of interesting. I preferred the food up there. I developed gallbladder disease, and in Hanoi we ate bread, which was leavened with lard, and I couldn't eat that, couldn't tolerate it. And so my weight had gone down. And the engineer types who figured the weight of water in buckets and made fulcrums and figured out our weight, figured I weighed 144 one time. I'm shot down, I weighed about 215. I weigh a little more than that now, and I apologize. We're on a diet, but I had that chocolate cake tonight. I'll hear about that too. As our release approached, we got actually measured for Western clothes. We had, you've probably seen some pictures. We had these pajama-like looking things. Follow this color scheme now. Maroon and lavender stripes. Pretty horrible. Did I bring mine to show you? Duh. No. Sorry. But we got measured. We were going to have a shirt, pants with no fly, a button at the top, because you couldn't see that. We had a jacket. It was a light blue shirt, kind of Oxford cloth, and a zippered gray jacket. We got a little AWOL bag if we wanted to take anything home. And they confiscated most of the stuff I had that I wanted to take home. But the last magic day, there were days after that, but this was the magic day. They asked us all to come out of the cells in the back half. They'd taken down the dividing walls in between the cells. And it was a big courtyard kind of thing. It was very, very reminiscent of what I had been trained for in 1966 at Stead Air Force Base. Survival. First time we'd ever seen a big open courtyard like that. They said, I want you to line up. Well, as we're milling around doing this, way over there, we see cameras on feed. People are bringing cameras. So we said, all right, no emotion. So there's a guy that, a couple of senior officers we'd seen sporadically involved in the prison business. And their very best English speaker read the release document that they were required within 24 hours of Kissinger signing this to read the release documents to us. So they read that to us, and we did not do anything. Well, the best English speaker was a little upset about this. He turned and talked to the senior guys and came back and read it again. We didn't do anything. And then our SRO stepped forward and said, "Can we go back to our cells now?" So we ruined their propaganda circus for one final time. And we went to Clark. I have to tell you one final story. Well, I have two final stories. I know I've gone much longer than I intended with my stories. But I have ammunition. So we had an opportunity when we went home. As we pared down, we were in C-141s, and after the release occurred in Hanoi, we got hustled around to a ramp on the back of the C-141, and we're standing there waiting for people to get checked off. There's a corpsman guy off to the side wearing whites. He's got a little card file book, and he says, "Name?" And I said, "David Gray." And guess what? He said, "A-Y or E-Y?" So I thought, well, how absolutely marvelous. So I took another couple of steps up the ramp, and there's the kissing flight nurse, which I didn't know about. I hadn't been looking up there. I was kind of mystified looking at this guy. And this gal grabbed every one of us, planted a big kiss on us, and she was wearing musk perfume, which hadn't existed in 1967. We're like, holy mackerel, what is this? So then several days after we got poked and prodded in Clark, we started heading home. My flight went to Hickam, and then Travis and Kelly. At Kelly, they pared us down and put us on the C9s. The rest of the hospital configured C9s, had the Red Cross on the tail. And 5 of us from the southeast were going to go to Maxwell and be poked and prodded there and do more debriefing and stuff like that. So we did, and they said, "You're going to have an opportunity to say a few words at a microphone." So we had seen flying in the C-141s for hours and hours. They had all the magazine coverage of the previous releases and clever things people had said. The Navy guy that brought the adorable little dog home with him. And there was a little jealousy, I guess, a little petty jealousy, and we got enamored with this idea of saying something quotable. So we all secreted away to different parts of the airplane, and we're writing stuff, following things up. That's not good. And eventually, I see that. Eventually, we got there, and we had a big argument about how we were going to get to speak at the microphone. They said, the senior guy, and then we're going to go by date of rank. No. Length of captivity. So that's how we did it. We prevailed. And it ended up screwing up the public affairs people who'd already figured out the other way. Well, I got to a microphone. One guy in front of me did the first day of the rest of my life. Coca-Cola had a big ad campaign going. It was in magazines then. And Ken, who some of us didn't care much for, that was his big quotable quote. I'll read you mine, then I'll sit down. I won't read it, I'll just do it from memory. A loving God made me an American. To America I return. A loving President preserved my honor. With honor I return. A loving family waited with strong heart. To them I return. Thank you, America. Well, and my little fleeting moment of fame was extended when a couple of years later we had a POW reunion where we visited President Nixon, now disgraced and kind of hiding in San Clemente in California. We all went down there, and he gave us a copy of his memoirs he'd been working on for a couple of years. And this obscure Air Force captain's reading was only one of two that was in his book. So that's the story. Longer than I had intended. I left out some glory words. God bless America.
Presenting to David Gray, because our resident graphics artist extols. Of course, you know, he does a gazillion plays. This is, I think you're going to treasure this one. Give Power, F-106 Reunion Nashville, September 9, 2017, 497 Tactical Fighter Squadron, Best Speaker Award, David Gray. Thank you, David, so much. Wow. I think we need about a 10-minute restroom break.
Yay!
Including the band. Man, it's your excuse for 10, 15 if you need a break. But we got about 15, 20 minutes of business, so Colonel, you may excuse me if they need a break for 15 minutes or whatever you need. We've got a good 20 minutes of business after our break. So take about a 10-minute break, not a half an hour break.